The goal, one of the goals of the American system, would be to achieve economic self-sufficiency. It would be to grow the U.S. economically, but it's supposed to help the nation expand, produce, and just be more productive. So Henry Clay and his American system. So the American system, we've talked about the three parts. The first one, he wants another national bank. There are infrastructure, also known as internal improvements. You might see that phrasing maybe on a test someplace. It's hard to know exactly what sort of phrasing the test will use. Infrastructure is roads and bridges and canals and things like that, but it can also be called internal improvements, okay? So just kind of know that those two things are interchangeable. And then we're going to pay for all of this with the protective tariff, but the protective tariff, the reason it has protective in front of it, what are we protecting? American industry. Make the imported product, in this case the British product, so expensive because of this high tariff, this high tax on imports, it would actually force Americans to buy the American-made version, supporting American industry, protecting American industry. All right, excellent. So let's talk about this protective tariff. All right, this protective tariff is the tariff of 1828, also known as the tariff of abominations. Now, Henry Clay and his Whigs passed this tariff of abominations. So who do you suppose is called, Henry Clay and his people passed this tariff, the protective tariff, tariff of 1828. It's nicknamed the tariff of abominations, and who, as in either what party or what person do you think nicknamed it the tariff of abominations? Yeah, Jackson and the Democrats, right? So political opponents called this the tariff of abominations. So folks who did not support the protective tariff, folks who did not support the American system, they do not like this tariff. And we've already talked about these. Protective means that is in excess of money necessary to finance the government. It is protecting American industry. So it is extra high. Higher than it needs to be to fund the government and what the government needs to do. And to date, it was the highest ever passed by Congress. Now, there's three main industries in the U.S. You don't need to list this. It's a little multiple choice question. Which industry benefits from this? Manufacturing. And where do we see manufacturing? The Northeast. So the other sections of the country, they're like, that's a tariff of abominations. And they hate it. Now, look at this. This is the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. Article 1 deals with Congress. And this is talking about how Congress can tax. Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, which is a tariff, impost and excises to pay the debts, and to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the U.S. That's what the Constitution says Congress has the power to tax. So what do you think? By this standard, is this tariff constitutional? All right, point to me how this tariff fits in here. What phrasing would you say?
It's to pay for the general welfare.
Yeah, the general welfare. Grow American industry is good for the general welfare. All right, good Whig answer there. Excellent. All right, okay, this guy. John C. Calhoun. He's Andrew Jackson's vice president. John C. Calhoun. Y'all got a little crush on John C.
No,
Calhoun?
he looks like Andrew Jackson. No, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Garfield.
Oh, I can see it.
Yes.
I can see it.
You-
Okay.
You're so right for that. Who said that? You're so right for that, honestly.
All right. So John C. Calhoun, South Carolinian. So representing an agricultural state, right? You know, they're cash cropping, they're cottoning, they're enslaving people. That's South Carolina. John C. Calhoun is also Andrew Jackson's vice president. He's a Democrat. And he said, we ain't going to pay this tariff in South Carolina. John C. Calhoun gets his friends back in South Carolina, because John C. Calhoun's not in South Carolina, he's in Washington D.C. because he's vice president. But he is in close connection with the government of South Carolina, and pretty much he is telling South Carolina, hey, nullify this tariff. It is unconstitutional. Because it goes beyond the scope of what the Constitution says. He would disagree with Eston, who says this supports the general welfare of the United States. He would say, Congress cannot charge a tax just to make extra money. They can only charge taxes to pay for the debt, pay for the defense, and, the well-being of the country. This goes beyond that. So South Carolina passes a law that nullifies the tariff, and South Carolina refuses to collect that tax within the borders of South Carolina. The law that they pass is called the South Carolina Exposition, and sometimes they stick on and protest. Just depends on what history book you're reading. South Carolina Exposition and Protest. This was South Carolina, who is controlled by the Democrats, are going to nullify the tariff of abominations. And now let's go back to this. Y'all remember the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions? This is what Calhoun is pointing to. He said, great president, Thomas Jefferson, another great president, James Madison, they wrote about nullification. With the, Jefferson wrote the Kentucky Resolution, Madison wrote the Virginia Resolution, and that the states have the authority to decide if a law passed by Congress is constitutional or not, right? And if the state does not agree, the state can nullify it. That's that principle established by Jefferson. So, Jackson has a dilemma. He has a problem on his hands. And let's go back to this guy one more time. Jefferson. Was he the loose constructionist or the strict constructionist guy? Strict. But whenever he became president, what happens?
The Louisiana Purchase happened.
Yeah, he gets all loosey-goosey.
And he justifies it because it mentions it in the Constitution, even though that's an interpretation.
Not really, right? So it's one of those things. Politicians might have this idea of how things go, but then whenever they become president, sometimes things change. So now we got to think about Jackson. Is Jackson, does he favor federal authority or is he a states' rights guy?
States' rights.
Yeah, he's a Democrat. He's a states' rights guy. Who's the head of the federal government at this time, though? Jackson. So, is he going to stick with being a states' rights guy, or is he going to say, no, the federal government has more authority because he's the head of the federal government, right? Going back to the bell ringer, you remember the cartoon? According to the cartoon, what side is he going to pick?
Federal.
Yeah. Federal authority. Andrew Jackson, here we go. So there's actually like a high drama moment in the White House. There's a big dinner at the White House. You got Jackson there, you got his vice president there. And before the dinner, Jackson stands up and to give a toast, and he lets everybody know in this toast what he's thinking. And he's thinking this: our federal union, it must be preserved. Meaning the federal authority is supreme. States fall in line. Calhoun stands up to give a toast, and he says, the union next to our liberty, the most dear. So without saying states' rights, he's saying states' rights. And they kind of, glare at each other. Luckily, there was no duel, but it was a very high, tense, it was a moment. So the president, he goes to Congress, and he basically is telling Congress, we are going to collect this tax, and Jackson is threatening to march into South Carolina and to start something his. So, in the U.S. Congress, in the Senate, you have this guy, Daniel Webster, as in the dictionary guy. Y'all sorry. Yes!
The dictionary.
The dictionary guy, that's him, same dude. He is going to debate against another guy named Hayne, who he does not have a dictionary named after him. I don't even know what state he's from. So, not important, so you know who wins this debate, right? Webster does. Webster is talking about how the national government has authority and the states need to fall in line. Hayne, he's a states' rights guy. But their debate over, can states nullify laws? Is nullification really a thing? It's not in the Constitution per se, but the states signed on to the Constitution, kind of like signing a contract. But if they think the federal government's breaking that contract, can they leave their agreement? So that's the debate. Webster. The end of this fiery speech that he gives is this little quote: liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. And it was one of those moments that, after a speech, everybody, there's the drop the mic moment. And everybody's like, yes, that did it. That's what we're doing. He's right. I'm on his side. So this kind of ends the debate in Congress about nullification. And it's pretty much nullification, states cannot. States cannot. So now Jackson's like, all right, saddle up, Army. We're rolling into South Carolina. But so what the Congress does, before Jackson gets on his horse here, they pass what becomes known as the Force Bill. This is 1832. And it authorizes it authorizes the president, in this case Jackson, to use force to collect a tariff in South Carolina. So Congress is like signing off on it about using force against South Carolina. South Carolina gets ready. They start calling out their militia. They start gathering up guns and weapons. And it looks like, this might be the tipping point here. But then our guy comes in. Henry Clay, the great compromiser. Gotta love Henry Clay. So Henry Clay comes up with what becomes known as the Compromise Tariff, or the Tariff of 1833. So this Compromise Tariff lowers rates charged in that tariff of abominations. So, South Carolina still they get a little bit of a win because they don't have to pay such a high tariff. But it is made known that South Carolina is, they will accept it and they will pay this new rate. It is still a protective tariff, but it's not as high as the previous one. So South Carolina, the representatives in the Congress for South Carolina vote in favor. But then the South Carolina legislature in the state of South Carolina, they nullify the force bill just to make the point that, yeah, I think we can still nullify stuff. We still think that's a thing. So South Carolina had to, get the last say. So crisis is averted for now. But if we fast forward, what would this be? 27 years? 1860? Where are the first battles of the American Civil War? The first shots of the American Civil War. It's not really a battle. It's in Charleston, South Carolina. So, South Carolina is going to be where the Civil War does start. It's not over a tariff, obviously, but for slavery. All right, Andrew Jackson. My favorite Andrew Jackson quote. And this was in the video yesterday. My only regret is that I didn't shoot Henry Clay, the corrupt bargainer, and I didn't hang John C. Calhoun, his own vice president, but who kind of instigates this nullification crisis. Yeah, and this is an actual photograph of Andrew Jackson. And so that's kind of cool. He was our first president to be photographed. This was after he had left the presidency, but you can still see how kind of haggard he looks. What do you notice about his glasses? Isn't this cool?
There's something, he is something.
Yeah, he has lenses. Yeah, he has lenses on the side so he can side-eye you if he needs to.
The original
Right?
side-eyer.
Yeah, it would be neat if they could like flip over for like a bifocal.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that would have been clever, but that's not what it was.
It was just.
It's for side-eye.
Side-eye,
Yeah.
so that we can side-eye everyone.
All right, so we're gonna take a look at one last Jackson video, because you'll know how much I love them.
Nancy office stands available.
Can I have one?
You can transfer your own.
You can have one. One. It's one.
One per person.
One per person. I don't know.
For public entity number one. Historical figures are often controversial, whether people were as deified or vilified in their lifetime as the 7th President of the United States. This is History versus Andrew Jackson. Order. Now, what were we? Yes. Mr. Jackson, you stand accused of degrading the office of the presidency, causing financial collapse, and wanton cruelty against American Indians. How do you plead? Now, Your Honor, I am not a big city lawyer, but I do know a few things. And I know that President Jackson was a self-made frontiersman, a great general, a real man of the people. Your Honor, this man of the people was a gambler, a drunk, and a brawler. Why, I've heard it said that he would fight at the drop of a hat and then drop the hat himself. I ask you, was such a man fit for the most distinguished office in the nation? Can we forget the debacle of his inauguration? Whoever heard of inviting a drunken mob into the White House? It took ages to get the upholstery clean. That drunken mob, sir, was the American people, and they deserve to celebrate their victory. Order. Now, did this celebration have pie? Very well. Mr. Jackson, is it not the case that immediately upon assuming office, you introduced the spoils system, replacing hundreds of perfectly good federal employees with incompetent party loyalists? Your Honor, the President did no such thing. He tried to institute rotation in office to avoid any profiteering or fun party who insisted on giving posts to their lackeys. But Mr. Jackson complied, did he not? Now, see here. Moving on. Mr. Jackson, did you not help to cause the financial panic of 1837 and the ensuing economic depression with your obsessive war against the Bank of the United States? Was not vetoing its reauthorization, as you did in 1832, an act of irresponsible populist pandering that made no economic sense? Your Honor, the gentleman has quite the imagination. That bank was just a way for rich Yanks to get richer. And all that money panic was caused when British banks raised interest rates and cut lending. To blame it on the president is preposterous, I say. But if Mr. Jackson had not destroyed the National Bank, it would have been able to lend to farmers and businesses when other credit dried up, would it not? This is all highly speculative. Can we move on? Certainly, Your Honor. We now come to Mr. Jackson's most terrible offense, forcing entire tribes out of their native lands via the Indian Removal Act. I resent that accusation, sir. The U.S. of A. bought that land from the Indians fair and square. Do you call coercion and threats by a nation with a far more powerful army fair and square? Or signing a treaty for removing the Cherokee with a small group that didn't include their actual leaders? They didn't even have time to properly supply themselves before the army came and forced them to march the Trail of Tears. Now hold on a minute. This was all Van Buren's doing after President Jackson left office. But Mr. Jackson laid the groundwork and made sure the treaty was ratified. All President Van Buren had to do afterwards was enforce it. Look here, Your Honor. Our government's been purchasing Indian land since the beginning, and my client was negotiating these deals even before he was president. President Jackson truly believed it was best for the Indians to get compensated for their land and move out west, where there was plenty of space for them to keep living the way they were accustomed, rather than stick around and keep butting heads with the white settlers. Some of whom, I remind our court, wanted to exterminate them outright. It was a different time. And yet, even in this different time, there were many in Congress and even the Supreme Court who saw how wrong the Removal Act was and loudly opposed it, were there not? My client was under a great deal of pressure. I say, do you think it's easy governing such a huge country and keeping the Union together when states are fixing to nullify federal laws? President Jackson barely got South Carolina to back down over those import tariffs. And then Georgia had to go discover gold and start grabbing up Cherokee land. It was either get the Indians to move or get in another fight with the state government. So you admit that Mr. Jackson sacrificed moral principles to achieve some political goals. I do declare, show me one leader who hasn't. As societies change and morals evolve, yesterday's hero may become tomorrow's villain, or vice versa. History may be past, but our understanding of it is always on trial.
All right. So, Andrew Jackson. Gotta love him. All right. We're going to wrap things up with some rather forgettable presidents real quick. And because we've had several forgettable presidents. And these next couple of ones, and they kind of qualify. So Jackson serves 2 terms. And even though the cartoon portrays him as an absolute monarch and a monarch will serve for life, Jackson, he was not going to buck the tradition as George Washington started and then told, hey, 2 terms and then get on out. So Jackson will serve his 2 terms, retire. So now in 1836, we kind of got a wide open presidency. And this is what it looks like. We have 5 contenders. Webster is Daniel Webster. And the Democratic candidate is Van Buren. And obviously, as you can see through here, Van Buren is going to win. He will win in the Electoral College. He has a majority in the Electoral College. As far as the popular vote goes, he even has a majority in the popular vote as well. Even in a 5-man race, he gets more votes than all the others combined. All right, so Martin Van Buren. He is the 8th president. He is a Democrat. How many terms he get?
1.
1 term, and that has a whole lot to do with these 2 bullets right here. back in these old days, we did not call it a depression, a recession. If there was financial trouble and the economy was in the toilet and people were losing jobs, we called it a panic. Okay, that was just the phrasing that was used back then. So the Panic of 1837, the Panic of 1839, and again, the video kind of connects those panics with not having a national bank, a central banking system, and that is correct. We are in and out of panics all the time when we do not have a central bank. Just how it is. He's known as the Little Magician, and he's from New York, and we got a 60-second, actually it's probably 90-second, quick little look at him.
Martin Van Buren is probably the most important politician that you never think about. Born 1782 in Kinderhook, New York, he climbed the ranks in state government that led the Albany Regency, the most powerful political machine in America's biggest state. He was so good at organizing that they called him the Little Magician, and presto, he transformed into a U.S. Senator. For his next trick, he got his good friend Andrew Jackson elected president. They were an odd couple. Martin was polite and elegant, while Andrew once killed a man in a duel. But they both believed in small government and rewarding their friends for their support. In 1828, Van Buren unified Jackson's supporters across the country to form the Democratic Party, and he managed the first modern-looking presidential campaign. Van Buren ended up as vice president, then conjured up his own election in 1836. Unfortunately, that put him in charge during the Panic of 1837, the worst economic collapse America had ever seen. What's more, there wasn't a national bank to keep things stable, because Jackson got rid of it the year before. Oops. Van Buren also refused to annex Texas because he didn't want to deal with the issue of slavery expansion. He was more interested in furthering his political career than making a controversial decision. In 1840, voters made Van Buren disappear, but you can thank him for what some refer to as the smoke and mirrors of presidential campaigning.
Alright, so the Little Magician, he was what we would call nowadays a party operative, meaning he was a campaigner, a fundraiser, an organizer. As a politician, he was, still an operative. He's only a one-termer because whenever it comes to voting, people vote with their wallet. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And because there were two financial panics while he was president, most Americans were not better off than they were 4 years ago. So they're going to go with the other guy from the other party. And that's why he's a one-termer. Same thing with poor little Jimmy Carter up here. One of the best humans that ever walked the planet, Jimmy Carter. But he's a one-termer because we had a terrible economy while he was president. All right, so the next presidential election is the election of 1840. The Whigs, they've learned a lot. They understand this popular democracy is where the votes are and where you're going to win. Pretty much we have universal male suffrage throughout the United States by this point, so you have to appeal to the common man, as Jackson and Van Buren knew. So this election of 1840, you have the Whigs, who we called an elitist group earlier yesterday when we were comparing the two parties side by side. They actually do a very grassroots populist campaign, and they appeal to the common man more so than the Democrats, whose, Jackson was their legacy. But the Democratic candidate was this guy from New York City. That doesn't appeal to a Westerner or a Southerner or to a common manner, right? The guy that was appealing to them was William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, he was an Indian fighter on the frontier. And that helps. We're military heroes. Jackson was a military hero. So the Whigs, they nominate William Henry Harrison. He runs against Van Buren. William Henry Harrison wins. His campaign slogan was one of the best of all times. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Tippecanoe is the Battle of Tippecanoe, where William Henry Harrison fought and beat Tecumseh. And Tecumseh's League of Indians that he had united in the Ohio River Valley to fight against the Americans. But William Henry Harrison, old Tippecanoe, as he won that battle, is going to win. This is one of their campaign placards. Harrison and Tyler, and they had what they call the log cabin campaign, making Harrison look like a frontiersman who grew up in the log cabin. This is a political cartoon. This is Harrison saying, "Enjoy my hospitality." And you've seen this reference with the hard cider. And that, again, was an appeal to the frontiersmen. I drink whiskey just like you do. That's kind of what they're going for there. And of course, you can see, who do you think this guy is back here? Jackson aiming his gun at Harrison, right? All right, so when the election is coming along, Harrison gets a majority of the popular vote. The electoral vote, it's more of a landslide, but you can see that he has, of course, he's a Whig, so he gets a lot of Northeastern support, but also what we call the Midwest now, where he's from. All right, short little video on William Henry Harrison, just like the one we watched for Van Buren, and then we'll be done.
William Henry Harrison is the only man who made no mistakes as president because he died after 32 days on the job. So let's talk about how he got that job. Harrison was born to a prominent Virginia family in 1773. He saw fame as a military officer, fighting Indian tribes in the Northwest in the 1790s. Before long, he was the governor of Indiana Territory, and he was pretty good at negotiating confusing treaties that took a lot of land from Indians. Harrison was a national hero after beating an Indian army in 1811 at the Battle of Tippecanoe. He followed that up with a few wins during the War of 1812. Then he retired to Ohio and had a mediocre political career for 20 years. But the young Whig Party recruited General Harrison as a celebrity candidate. After seeing how well the Democrats had done with General Andrew Jackson, the notorious log cabin campaign of 1840 ignored politics and focused on personality. The Whigs fudged the details to making the aristocratic Harrison seem like a common man. He beat President Van Buren easily, but at age 68, he couldn't beat pneumonia. To prove he could handle the job at his age, he gave the longest inaugural speech in our history on a cold, misty March day. He caught a cold, which turned into pneumonia. In April 1841, he became the first president to die in office.
All right.
Yeah, actually.
And how old did they say he was? Yeah, he was in his 60s. Holy gosh, okay. And they were like, "Oh, he's so old," and he had to prove that he wasn't old, right?
And that causes sickness. And
Yes, and then he died.
that is so ironic.
But then, okay, how old is our president now? 80. And he's running again.
He's running again.
That's a little
I don't like
worrisome.
anyone.
Little worrisome.
Obama.
I would love to vote for anybody younger than me. Like,
Please pull an
really,
FDR.
I would love
Not more young.
Yes.
But not the dying
No,
part.
I prefer Biden
Okay,
over Trump.
so here we go.
Biden over Trump.
Let's take a
I still don't like any of
let's
them.
take care of the learning check real
He's
quick,
gorgeous.
and then we will start our little
Come
vocab
back.
quiz.
Sounds terrifying.
Can we call it a game, please? My heart keeps. I can't do this.
Yes, we'll play the vocab game. Alright.
Is it saying like what caused it or like what was the issue with it?
Yeah, what was the issue, what caused the
Oh, okay.
nullification process
okay.
while Jackson was president?
Why did they cancel investigation, or why is it
Alright.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, I
why
got
did
everything.
they cancel investigation?
it up here.
How you like
Like,
red?
why did the issue of
Scrambled.
notification come up in the first place? What caused
Really?
South Carolina?
Cheesy.
Right
Oh,
now,
no,
we're gonna
oil.
notify that.
Oil?
So the tariff
tariff.
is, yeah.
In the yolk. You should try one day.
Okay.
I want to try that.
Really good.
Y'all put the tariff